What's up, nerds? Russia has launched a new offensive into Kharkiv. Meanwhile, Putin has fired Sergei Shoigu as the Minister of Defense. So there's a lot to talk about in this video, so we're going to go ahead and start by talking about the Russian offensive in Kharkiv, what has happened and what might happen next, and why this is all going on. We're also going to talk about the firing of Sergei Shoigu as the Minister of Defense in Russia, what was behind that change, what might be coming next, and where is Shoigu headed now. Of course, I'm recording this video on the 13th of May, 2024. Let's jump into it. Now, first on Kharkiv, Russia has begun its offensive. Now, I think it's important to contextualize what's going on right now. It's not the largest offensive that we've seen so far. That is to say, looking at the map, the Russian lodgement so far in Kharkiv is not that geographically large, but it is large enough to note, and it's large enough that it could become a larger problem quite quickly. And there are two main axes, I think, to look at here. One is to the east, moving south along the Donetsk River, and the other is very close to the west of that first axis, moving south along the Kharkiv Lake. According to one Ukrainian source, there was significant fighting. However, the Russians are starting to face stiffening resistance, and their losses are beginning to mount. Interesting, though, there is a statement here that the defenses were built in the wrong areas, and that the commander of this area was actually fired and replaced. He does say that the Ukrainians are receiving artillery ammunition, so that has not yet been an issue, and describes the overall situation as not yet critical. Now, we've spoken about the roughly 50,000 Russian troops in Belgorod and how there have been reports that those soldiers might be preparing for an offensive into Kharkiv. These troops appear to have received a new insignia to basically signify their battle group that's here on the screen now. This may not be the only place that they choose to attack. This might be, a reconnaissance in force. This might just be like a probing attack to see where the defenses are. We may see further attacks similar to this in the future on other parts of the border as well. I do think that it's interesting to note that as of right now, from what I've seen, we're not seeing large armored assaults on the front here. We're mostly seeing dismounted, assaults at like a platoon level or a company level, moving towards the fighting, on foot. And that exposes these troops, obviously, to artillery, to drones, to gunfire. However, it preserves the equipment. And that might be evidence that Russia is trying to, be a bit more smart about when and where it employs its heavy equipment, maybe because it's losing so much in other parts of the front line. And if it runs into, stronger defensive positions, that equipment might be in danger, not only from mines, but from ATGMs, javelins, tanks, other kinds of threats like that. So the dismounted infantry can basically push forward, identify enemy strong points, and then either fall back or continue the attack to just keep pressure on the Ukrainian forces in the area, while the main battle group basically decides when and where it's going to attack next. Now, the overall border between Ukraine and Russia here is pretty long, and so this lodgement doesn't necessarily mark a very large swath of land, but it's significant. This is a big moment because this is the second time that Russia has attacked into the Kharkiv Oblast, the first time being really at the opening of the war. And since then, Russia has opted to not attack this province. They've really stuck down to the south in Zaporizhia and Kherson, and they've also stuck into, Donetsk and Luhansk. Now, there's been a lot of speculation on where exactly this offensive could go in the future. 50,000 troops is woefully short of what would be needed to attack Kharkiv city. Let's be real. Russia would have to move troops from other parts of the front to this area, or it would have to recruit a significant amount of new soldiers to beef up this force to be able to threaten Kharkiv city. If we're using Bakhmut and Avdiivka as examples, and those are much, much smaller towns compared to Kharkiv city is the second largest city in Ukraine. If we use those cities as examples, Russia's going to need at least 100,000 troops to be able to threaten Kharkiv city. And mind you, the battles of Bakhmut and Avdiivka were months-long engagements each. Significant fights that cost Russia, tens of thousands of troops, both killed and wounded, as well as hundreds of heavy equipment pieces. So Kharkiv city is going to be a much, much larger engagement than both of those, just because it is such a huge city. It's so strategically important for Ukraine. And so that, as of right now, it doesn't really seem like Russia is staging to attack Kharkiv city. It might be that they're at least wanting to threaten it. I've seen some say that this is an attempt to create a buffer zone along the border. We've seen Russia express interest in the creation of a buffer zone with Ukraine. Of course, they would want that buffer zone to be on the Ukrainian side of the border. And so this might be an attempt to create at least part of that. But at the same time, I think it's important to realize that, a buffer zone might prevent, these cross-border raids that we've seen in the past that have gone into Belgrade with like the Russian Volunteer Corps. It might prevent those kinds of things, but it's not going to prevent Ukraine from launching these kinds of, cross-border attacks with drones and other kinds of long-range fires targeting oil facilities and stuff like that. So, the creation of a buffer zone, not really going to defend, the deeper, more strategic targets of Russia, but it might prevent those kinds of cross-border raids. Now, I watched in Preston Stewart's video talking about this that, he mentioned that Russia might be attempting to push close enough to Kharkiv city where they could get within artillery range of the city. And that might be true, but I'm kind of wondering what the point of that might be. Russia's already able to hit Kharkiv city with FABs, which are much more powerful than artillery shells. Of course, you can hit a target way more with artillery just because, smaller shells, you're in range, you can just saturate it with artillery. But at the same time, Russia already has the capability of, like, say, disrupting Ukrainian logistics operations within and around Kharkiv city. So that's putting artillery within range might just let them fire more, I guess, at those targets. But if they're not actually attacking to take Kharkiv city, I'm kind of curious on what the actual objective would be. Now, if they are trying to put artillery in range, then that might be an indicator that their ultimate goal is to take Kharkiv city. But again, we would also have to see an accompanying movement of tens of thousands of Russian troops to Kharkiv or to Belgrade to reinforce this effort and to really make this, a more realistic plan moving forward. I already mentioned from that Ukrainian post that it appears that Ukrainian defensive lines in this area are not yet complete or built in the wrong areas. There have been some videos and images that have been posted, I'm showing these on the screen now, of some of the defensive lines that are built in this area. Some of these defensive lines have been described as better and more capable than those built in Bakhmut, capable of a 360 defense, meaning defense from, even if they're surrounded. However, they have been built further back from the border. And I think there's a lot of confusion about this. And so I think we need to kind of just wait and see and get more evidence on exactly what's built and where. We might need to honestly just wait for more indicators on where these might be and what kind of capability these defenses have, either through videos and photos being published, or even through just, Russian advances pushing forward and then reaching these lines. And then we would see, really the slowdown of the Russian advance, as well as a tremendous spike in casualties. I do think that it is notable that already so far we've seen the Russian advance slow to a degree, and the Ukrainian accounts have really kind of backed that up. And we've also seen the Ukrainian claim of Russian casualties spike, including yesterday being the single-day record so far in this war in Russian casualties. Now, mind you, the source of that claim that's coming from Ukraine, so this figure is likely vastly overinflated. But at the same time, that could be an indicator that the Russians are reaching stronger defensive positions. They're being slowed down. They're receiving more casualties. That might be an indicator that they are, in fact, reaching some sort of hardened defensive positions, and that is slowing their advance. Now, this offensive, overall, Ukrainian sources appear to say that they're not yet in bad shape in this area, but we will continue to monitor and see where this goes. Now, this is not the only massive change so far in this war. Sergei Shoigu is now officially out as the Minister of Defense of Russia. He had been serving for a long time up to this point. He now is moving to the role of the Secretary for the Security Council, replacing Nikolai Patrushev. And replacing Sergei Shoigu is an economist by the name of Andrei Belousov. Now, this is an interesting change because this is a change that gives Shoigu a move that saves some face. It can appear as a promotion, even though he's not really going to be Minister of Defense anymore. And the MOD gets a new leader. Now, I mentioned that Belousov is not from a military background. He's an economist. This isn't necessarily a huge change from the status quo. You might remember that Shoigu himself doesn't have a military background. He has a civil engineering background. There have been several different ideas on why exactly this change is happening now. You might remember that one prominent general had been fired and arrested on corruption charges just a couple weeks ago who was close to Shoigu. The appointment of Belousov might be part of a larger strategy by Putin to basically overhaul the Ministry of Defense. He he has a history of replacing ministers of defense with people from outside the military to enact more radical changes. And this is something that is mentioned by Rob Lee in his post about this, as well as by Dara Masico talking about this as well. And those threads are here on the screen right now. Now, what those reforms are going to be, time is going to tell. Thus far, Gerasimov remains as the commander of the overall war in Ukraine, but that could change as well. Putin is likely trying to protect his people and giving them opportunities to save face while also overhauling the Ministry of Defense for a longer, more protracted war. We'll see what those changes are. That appears to be a work in progress that might take weeks or even months, but that just appears to be the direction this is all headed. With all that, I want to hear what your thoughts are on this, and I also want to hear your thoughts on the Russian offensive in Kharkiv. Where do you think that is going? If you found this video helpful or informative, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more analysis on the war in Ukraine. We talk about this every pretty much 3 days, more or less. With all that, I'll be seeing you all later. Bye.